Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to part 2 of my winter jacket that I started in last week's video, where I was showing you the fitting process, and then we also started with the zipper in the front, so a very intricate part of the jacket. Today we're hopefully gonna finish it, so let's get started right away. So this is the front that we finished in last week's video. I'm gonna link the video for you guys up here in the eye and also in the description down below, so you can watch that before you watch this video, otherwise you're starting in the middle of it. So we're gonna continue by putting the back piece that already has the darts in together with the shoulder seams of the front piece. We're not gonna put the lower back piece on yet because as there are folds in the shell and also in the lining, you kind of want to, have both in at the same time to be able to put the folds in. So like we kind of have to wait on the step of putting the lower piece onto the upper piece in the back until we have the lining in. But whatever, that's gonna come later on. We're gonna put the shoulder seams together right here, putting right sides of front and back shoulder seams together. And then we're gonna iron this open so that we can continue with the sleeves. Let's iron this whole thing open. And now we're gonna put the sleeves on. So the sleeve have darts as well, which we want to close, like put in first. So same with the other darts in the piece, put them onto the wrong side of your fabric so that you can just top stitch along the lines. I'm gonna put right sides together and sew across here. So I want to iron the dart towards the back, which is, where the shorter distance is. Like that. And now it's very easy to see where the back and front is. The dart sits right here, so this is the back and this is the front. Or you can also see it right here in the sleeve cap, wherever it's steeper. And usually the notch here, the sleeve notch, has a smaller distance to the side seam, that's the front. Whereas here, the notch is up here. So you see the clear difference right here, and this is not as steep as this curve right here. This is the back. So now I can determine that this sleeve right here is supposed to go onto this arm's eye right here, back to back, front to front. So I can put this right sides together and match up all of the notches. You're gonna find a shoulder notch, which matches up with the shoulder seam, and then obviously the front and back sleeve notches should match up with the ones in the front and back respectively. And then the in-between you have to ease together. So the sleeve, as you can see here, is a teeny tiny bit bigger, but you're gonna be able to ease it together so that there should be no gathering, no folds, nothing. It should just perfectly fit with a small little bump at the shoulder. And we're gonna put shoulder pads in as well, so it's gonna look super nice in the end. So with all of that now pinned in place, I'm gonna go ahead and put the sleeves in. Okay, that's what it looks like once we put it right sides out. This is what it should end up looking like. A very clean and nice finish right here with this teeny tiny bump up here. Not a lot, but we're gonna make it even more pronounced once we put the shoulder pad in. So let's repeat the same for the other side. And we can also start ironing all of the seam allowances into the sleeve. Before doing that, I like to clip into the seam allowances. As you can see, it kind of bunches up like that, and I want to, shrink that down as much as possible. So I'm gonna clip into the seam allowance every centimeter or so that it lays nicer, like so. And now it has the chance to overlap wherever it, used to bubble up. It can just overlap and it's just flatter that way, and it's gonna end up being really nice once we iron this. Speaking of, let's do so. I like to use my sleeve board for that, as I can fit my sleeve onto that really nicely. And then I want to use steam to iron the seam allowances into the sleeve. So in order to get a crisp shoulder just like that one, I already finished it. This is what it looks from the inside. So we have a shoulder pad, a sleeve head wadding, and then all of the seam allowances facing towards the sleeve. And this gives structure, it gives this really nice shoulder, and I want to repeat that obviously for the other side. So I have my shoulder pad right here. This is one where there is more or less a sleeve head wadding already like added to it, but we're not really going to use that. I actually am going to end up cutting towards the stitching line here once it's in place, so that, you know, it falls correctly, because I had the feeling like it was too small inside of the sleeve, so it was kind of like bunching up the fabric. So I relieved that pressure through just cutting into the seam allowances there, and then I added sleeve head wadding additionally to that, so we're not actually going to use this part. So if you have a normal shoulder pad, you know, that stops right here and has the crisp shape and nothing round like this, you can totally use that. This is just, you know, a low profile one that I have at hand and which I can alter to work for this pattern. So what I'm going to do, I have a shoulder line right here, and that's the shoulder point, and this line right here I can also like match up with the shoulder seam. I want to have this shoulder point sit right on the shoulder point of my shell. If you're working with a normal one without the sleeve head wadding, you want to overlap that by 1 centimeter. You want to move the shoulder pad approximately 1 centimeter towards the sleeves to get like a nice bump right here. I'm gonna just match that up right here and temporarily pin that in place so I can continue working. And then also the line right here needs to be matched up with the shoulder line here. Also just gonna pin that in place temporarily. And now with all of the seam allowances, let me just turn this around so I can work better. With all of the seam allowances facing into the sleeve, I'm gonna go around, pinning from the side where the seam allowance is, because that's where I'm going to sew in the end, and pin the shoulder pad in place. However, it falls kinda. We're gonna see if that is correct. You can see how it doesn't match up with the indicated line on the pad itself. That happens, you know, since obviously my pattern is different to whatever the shoulder pad is made after. So just do whatever your pattern tells you, like however it falls on your pattern to get the best result. So now everything is pinned in place here. I want to kind of pop the shoulder out to see if there is like any obvious mistakes, which it doesn't look like it. So I would go ahead now and sew the shoulder pad in place. And I do that with the seam allowance facing towards me on the sewing machine. And I'm just gonna sew right next to the seam of my arm's eye that I just did, not going anywhere further inwards since that would alter my piece. But I'm gonna stay pretty close to that to sew the shoulder pad in. And now I'm gonna take my sleeve head wadding, which will be included in the pattern, of course. You're gonna cut that out of some sort of felt, or you can also buy that. A sleeve head wadding, you know, I already cut out prepared one. I like to just make them myself and go after the shape of my sleeve. I just feel like that's better and it's more individual, I guess. So I'm gonna take that. You have to check which side goes where. So I can see that this is the back, and that means it needs to go this way with the back to the back and the front to the front. Before I am adding it though, I'm going to go ahead and cut towards the stitching line here. As I mentioned, you don't have to do that if you're using normal shoulder pads, but I kind of have to since these are not the ones that I usually use. And now I can match up all of my notches with the seam. So I see the shoulder seam right here, so I match the notch up with the shoulder seam. And since it is after the pattern of my sleeve, I can just flap pin it onto my sleeve right here and go after the seam allowance here. And also I'm pinning the shoulder pad onto that whole thing. It's like it's gonna be a big sandwich right here. And I'm gonna go and sew at about 5 millimeters right here. Gonna sew at 5 millimeters. And now, once we pop out the sleeve, it looks pretty nice already. I wanna go around and iron again all of the seam allowances into the sleeve because we added a bunch of stuff which is not yet ironed, so that's important, especially the felt and the shoulder pad. And voila, you have a perfect crisp shoulder with a pad, a sleeve head wadding, and it looks super nice. So that is a really nice result. I'm gonna put it onto my dress form, or on me. Let's put it on me and see how it looks like. There you go. Makes a really, really nice crisp shoulders. I think it looks amazing. I always love shoulder pads. They always make every garment look more elegant, I guess, and I really like, you know, sewing them because it's so satisfying for some reason to me. That's really, really nice. So in order to continue, we have to address the back situation. Now, I'm still gonna go through with the whole, I'm not gonna put the folds in until the lining is in thing, because that is the only way, at least that I can think of, how you can put the folds like together with the lining into the piece. So I'm still gonna do that, but that is only restricted to the fold areas. So you should have all of these notches in the lower back piece right here, which indicate the fold lines. So we're gonna have a nice little box pleat in the back right here, which the lining also has. That leaves us with the problem of how are we going to continue if the side seams are not done and everything. So what I will be doing between the two outer notches is where the folds will be, and that is a no-go area as of right now. So the center one is our center back, and then from the side seam until the first notch on both sides, I can sew. That leaves us with, you know, the no-go area of the fold. And that's what I want to do. I'm gonna put right sides of my back piece onto here. The notches, the first ones next to the center back notch, should meet the back darts, and then repeat the same for the side seam coming towards the center back. And, you know, sew from here to here, and then sew from here to here, leaving this just open. So I went as far as I could, so I went until the notches on both sides, and I'm just gonna like leave that wherever it wants to go, essentially. So it's gonna sit in the end towards the center back, but we're gonna have to have the lining in place to be able to fold this, and then the rest here will be sewn down by hand. So we're gonna close the lining and everything right here, which usually is here at the hem. We're just gonna move that hole where you take everything out and like turn right sides out, or whatever you do on the inside. We're just gonna move that up to the waistline. So essentially, we're not doing anything differently, but since we are kinda restricted on how to sew this any other way, we're just moving it up to the waist folds right here. And it's gonna end up looking like this. So the darts should meet the fold line, the box pleat here, and it all should line up. The seam I'm going to iron open, and I'm also gonna go ahead and cut down the seam allowance of the dart, just as I did with the front dart, you know, just to reduce a little bit of bulk. And then right here where the fold starts, I'm gonna not iron that as of right now, because there is a lot of bulk and it's probably best to iron it up, but that's a problem for once we actually put the lining in. And now with that in place, I have a full side seam, and I can now close that and we can put on the jacket for the first time. So let's put right sides together here of the side seam, match everything up, make sure that the seam allowance is here underneath your arm, face towards the sleeve, and then obviously the sleeve hem as well. Now the side seam I'm gonna iron open. I'm gonna use a tailor's ham for that since this is rather curved. And then right here where the waistline is, I actually have to cut towards the stitching line in order for it to lay nice, because otherwise this is gonna like pull on the whole piece and it's just not gonna lay nice. So I'm gonna not cut into the seam itself, but I'm gonna cut next to it twice, above and below, so that it can open up. And that's our sleeve. It looks really, really nice. So I went ahead and actually changed the backdrop for my camera here because, wow, my hand is really washed out, because I'm gonna work with black fabric and I hope this is gonna make everything, you know, more visible. So we're gonna continue with the lining, and for that, wow. There you go. For that, I cut out all of my lining pattern pieces out of this black rayon lining right here, and then I also have my back neck facing and then my front facing right here, which I cut out of the same fabric that I used for the facing of my zipper facing, so you know, the thinner material. So I have all of these materials now, and essentially what I'm gonna do is just put the whole thing together the same way as I did with the shell. So I'm gonna start with the front piece, which will be sewn together with the front facing. So right here, I'm gonna put the front dividing seam together right here, same to the other side. So with that now in place, I'm gonna go ahead and iron that open, or actually I'm gonna iron the seam allowance towards the lining. And while doing that, I'm also gonna go ahead and iron the lining nicely, like so. I'm gonna do the same for the other side. I feel like it's better if I do it on blue. Yeah, it's not as washed out. Okay, I'm gonna use the blue background. I'm gonna put the shoulder seams together, so I'm gonna have to put the upper back on, which has the darts, and then also the back neck facing, which goes up here. So let's close the darts first. I made sure to also draw in the darts onto my wrong side of the fabric. Let's iron the darts towards the side seams. And now we can add the back neck facing to the back neck facing seam right here. So let's put right sides together and match up the center back. Now, since the curves are opposite, I am going to cut towards the stitching line into my lining piece right here so that these match up and it's easier to sew in the end, because this is pretty difficult if you don't cut towards the stitching line here. So I'm just gonna do that every centimeter or so. And now you can see how this is now able to open up and you can actually pin it in place here. I'll repeat the same for the other side and then I'm gonna sew everything in place. Now I'm gonna go ahead and iron the seam allowance into the lining, like so. And now we can put the shoulder seams together by putting right sides of the front pieces onto the back piece, and the back neck facing should match up with the front facing here as well. And now I can go ahead and sew this in place. Let's iron the seam allowance towards the back. And with all of that in place, we can go ahead and add the sleeve lining. We have darts in the sleeve as well, so I'm quickly gonna close those. I'm ironing the sleeve dart towards the back, same as with the shell. And now I can go ahead and add the sleeve to the correct arm's eye, which I can check with the dart. Same as with the shell, I'm just gonna put the shoulder seam together with the shoulder notch, then the side seam, and of course the sleeve notches. And now I'm gonna go ahead and put the sleeves in place. To iron the sleeve, I'm gonna go around the arm's eye with my sleeve board and iron all of the seam allowances into the sleeve. This is a lot easier for the lining than it was for the shell, in my opinion. I for some reason had a few troubles with this side, but not with this side. Like, this one worked out perfectly fine. No folds, nothing. It looks like there are folds, but it's not. It's just eased in. So now that this is done, we can go ahead and do the same thing to the lower back right here, where we leave the folds open. So pin the two pieces together, matching up the center back, and then the dart matches up with the start of the fold. So I'm gonna sew right towards the notch there, which needs to match up with the dart. And then for the side seam, the same thing, like so. And I'm gonna sew this section, leaving the fold like just free, and then sew the other section towards the side seam. And it's all gonna make sense once we actually put the lining onto the shell. And then you'll see why we're not able to sew the folds in as of right now. Let's close the side seams, which we now can do with the lower portion also in place. Let's put the right sides together and close it all the way to the sleeve hem. So before we put the lining onto our shell, I actually want to go ahead and iron the hem facing up into the piece. Now, since I ironed on the interfacing as well, this should be rather simple, as the interfacing kind of already makes the hem facing fold where it's supposed to fold. Obviously, it's always best to measure, so go ahead and do that. And now with that prepared, we can go ahead and put the lining onto the shell. And since we have this opening, we can kind of go around the whole perimeter of the shell and close the hem already, because we can take everything out from this hole right here. That will be the hole where we will turn everything right sides out. So essentially what we did is transfer the hole that is usually in here just up into the waistline for the sake of being able to put in the folds. Usually you have it either in here, or if you do the industrial method, you have it in the lining of your sleeve so that you can machine stitch everything, which is my preferred method. But since the folds are here and have to be somehow sewn in place, that's in my mind, the only option that we have. So we just transferred the hole up into the waistline. Everything else is still exactly the same as to what you would usually do. So let's take our lining and put it right sides onto our shell, matching up the center back, the shoulder seams, everything as per usual. And I'm gonna try to match up the shoulder seam here. And then it's getting interesting here at the front, because we have like all of this, which needs to be sewn somehow. So what we need to do is find the stitching line in our lining. So we measure inwards from both seam allowances, a centimeter or whatever your seam allowance is, to find our stitching point, like right here. Then I'm gonna take a needle, and that point has to match up with the point where we cut towards here in the front. So for my fabric, it's a bit tricky because it also kind of teared out a bit, which is not really good, but maybe I can make it work with a few pins. And then we have this tilting point for the front. It just should open up like that. And this now needs to be put together with this whole sandwich of everything we have in here, trying to have like where it ripped out as tiny as possible. So you kind of want to like put that back together if you have the same issue as I am having right here. You want a bar tag over that as well to prevent any more ripping. And then you'll find a notch down here which marks the end of your facing, like the zipper facing. And also the notch needs to match up, same thing with the stitching line, exactly with that point where you cut towards here as well. So let's try to do that as neat as possible. Now we're gonna sew only until a centimeter lower than the notch, because that is until where the hemline reaches, right here. So I just measured a centimeter lower, and that's until where we're gonna sew. And this should match up now as well with the waist notch, also matching up with all of the other waist notches in this thing right here. Let's match up the neckline and repeat the same for the other side, where it should be a teeny tiny bit easier as we don't have the facing on there, like so. And then I'm gonna stitch from this needle all the way over to the other side, also to that needle. So once we turn everything right sides out, this is just to check if everything went well. We can see that this actually worked out really nicely. There are no holes whatsoever. Same thing to down here. And this is what the other side looks like. So that's really nice. As I said, we're going to add top stitches once everything is in place so that this does not open up like that anymore, but stays covering the zipper as intended, like that. And that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. This is a really special project, which I'm super happy about. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you'll get notified every time that I post. And also leave a like and a comment to boost the algorithm. That would help me out a lot. In the meantime, if you haven't already, please go ahead and check out my social media for short format content. Links to all of that are in the description box down below, and hit follow there. The most direct way to support me and keep videos just like this one coming is to head over to my Etsy store. Link is also in the description box down below, where you also find the pattern for this jacket as well. So maybe if you're looking for a spontaneous Christmas gift for another sewing enthusiast, you can go over there and check all of my patterns out. A special thank you to my channel members. You'll get exclusive benefits through the link in the description down below. So thank you so much for watching, and I'm gonna see you next week probably. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and bye guys!